One of the things that I love about hand sewing is that you can do it almost anywhere. All you need is your tools, your fabric, and your creativity. I love planning out a project, gathering the supplies, and keeping it in a basket or a bag that I can grab at a moment's notice. There's just something about creating with your hands over a span of time and watching it come together stitch by stitch that makes you realize that you've created a small piece of your life that you can hold in your hands. Before we get started, I want to show you a few things that you'll need to know for every single lesson. Just a few tips and tricks that I think will make things easier for you as you get started. It's worth it to spend a little bit of time practicing threading a needle, knotting your thread, and tying off your work so that those things are comfortable for you as you start learning how to stitch. You'll need some embroidery floss and your chenille needle for the next step. So grab those things and let's get started. We talked about embroidery floss a little earlier. If you remember, embroidery floss is used for decorative stitching, comes in a skein, and is made up of 6 strands that can be separated for variation. We'll be doing most of our sewing with embroidery floss. Let's go ahead and take a look at our embroidery floss first. So the first thing you're going to need to do is locate the end of the floss. And if it's not just sticking out here nicely for you, you'll look inside one of the loops on either end. And there you'll find the end of the floss. So once you find the end, you're going to go ahead and pull it out 2 lengths, which will be about 24 inches or about as long as your arm. So either of those measurements will work great. Then we're going to clip it. And if you're pulling this out and it gets bound up or tangled during the time you're pulling, all you'll do is you'll slide one of these wrappers to one end or the other, find the knot, and work it out with your fingers and then continue to pull. So we're going to set this skein aside for now. And then once we've got our floss, I like to tap it on the end, and that kind of separates the little pieces. And then we're going to grab one of those little pieces and pull it until we pull it all the way through and separated from the main strand. So we've got one little piece of floss here ready to use. Okay, now we're going to get another one. And they should pull nice and easily through that strand of floss. And what we're going to do is we're going to get 3 pieces of floss to use. So throughout this course, we'll be using 3 strands anytime we're doing embroidery work. So I've got these 3 strands that I'm not going to be using, and I'm just going to set those aside for now. And I'm going to take the 3 that I've just pulled out, and we'll match up the ends. And then once we do that, we'll just smooth it out with our fingers, and we've got this piece of floss that's ready to go. For the first few lessons, we'll be using a chenille needle, and we'll be working on felt. If you remember, a chenille needle has a larger eye, which makes it pretty easy to fit a few strands of floss through. So to thread a needle, you're going to hold the needle in your dominant hand with the eye facing upwards, and you're going to be holding onto the shaft. And then I'm going to take my embroidery floss, the 3 strands that we've just separated, and I'm going to loop it around the shaft of the needle, slide it carefully across the eye, and what that does is that gives me a little fold in my floss, and I can then push those through the eye of the needle like this. Okay, from here you're going to pull the floss through until you get your little tail through the other side. And then what we want is you want your tail to be about 8 inches long or about halfway down the length of your floss. So this is going to be our working floss. Now that we have the needle threaded, we need to tie a knot at the end of the floss. Here's a great little way to tie a nice flat knot that's not too bulky. In order to tie the knot, this is what you're going to do. You're going to hold the eye of your threaded needle in your non-dominant hand. And then take the tail of your floss in your dominant hand and place the tail of the floss between your fingers with the eye of the needle. Then you're going to wrap this part of the floss around the shaft 1, 2, 3 times, and then scoot those little wraps down along with the eye of the needle, and I'm going to pull the shaft right through my fingers, and I've got myself a nice flat knot. The running stitch is the most basic of all the stitches. Once you've mastered the running stitch, the others will come along naturally. It's all about training your hands and your fingers to be in charge of the needles and fabric. The thread is just along for the ride. Grab a small piece of felt that's easy to hold and thread your needle with embroidery floss that shows up well against the felt that you chose so that you can see your stitches easily. Now let's practice the running stitch. Okay, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw a couple of straight lines on a piece of felt. Now you can use any pen for this because this is just practice. You don't necessarily need to use your pen that erases with an iron. So once you've got your lines drawn on your felt, you're going to have your needle threaded with some floss that shows up well against the felt that you've chosen. You want your 3 strands of floss, and you want a nice flat knot, just like the kind we practiced. So once your needle's all prepared, let's get started. You're going to hold your felt so that there's a little bit of tension in your working area. So what I like to do is I like to pinch the top of my fabric between my pointer finger and my middle finger, and then I like to grasp it down here between my thumb and my ring finger. And that gives me a nice amount of tension so that I can work easily there. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to take the point of my needle, and working from back to front, I'm going to poke my needle up at the very end of the line that I drew, and I'm going to pull it all the way through until my knot stops on the back. From here, I'm going to insert the needle about 1/4 inch down my line, front to back, and we're going to pull the needle all the way through, and we've made our first stitch. From here, I'm just going to repeat the motion, coming from back to front, 1/4 inch in front of the stitch that I just made, and then going down that line another 1/4 inch. So that's about what we're shooting for, is 1/4 inch stitches. So as I'm working my way down this line, I'll work about 3 stitches or so, and then I'm going to check the back of my work to make sure that I don't have any knots or tangles going on back here, because this would be the time to take care of those. If I am getting some tangles, I could work them out with my fingers or my needle before I continue. So let's go ahead and keep working our way down that line, all the way down until you get to the end. As you're sewing, check the back of your work every so often to make sure you're not getting any knots. It's easier to work out those little tangles sooner than later. And if you let your needle dangle every once in a while so that your floss can unwind, you'll be less likely to get knots at all. Finish stitching along the first line that you made, and when you get to the end, make sure that you have a little bit more than a needle length of floss left so that we can tie a knot when we get to the end. Once you get down to the end of your line and you've got your last couple stitches left, you want to make sure that your stitch ends on the back so that we can have our knots on the back. So go ahead and poke your last stitch through, and then we're going to turn our work over. And to tie a knot, what you'll do is you'll insert the tip of your needle underneath that last stitch that you just made, and you'll pull it until you get a little loop. Then you're going to insert your needle through that loop, give it a little tug, And then we're going to do it one more time so that we have a knot. And then what I like to do is to insert the tip of my needle through one more stitch, and what that does is it keeps our little tails from flying around on the back of our work. And at this point we can snip it off. And here's the back of our work, and we've got our first row of running stitches. Now that you've stitched your first row of running stitches, I want you to think about the 4 S's as you practice another row. The 4 S's stand for straight, small, same-sized, and evenly spaced. If you'll work on making your running stitches straight, small, the same size, and evenly spaced, you'll end up with amazing results. Now we're going to stitch the next line on your practice piece of felt. Okay, let's go ahead and work this other row of running stitches, and this time we're going to be thinking about the 4 S's. So we're starting again at the very end of your row, and we're just going to be working up and down, and this time I'm going to be thinking about making straight stitches, small stitches, evenly spaced stitches, and same size stitches. So go ahead and practice those and work your way all the way down the row, and when we get to the end we'll tie off. Okay, once you get to the end of that row, let's make your final stitch towards the back of your fabric, turn it over, and we're going to go ahead and tie off our work. All right, now that we've finished those 2 rows of running stitch, let's go ahead and practice again, and this time we're going to do a curved line and an angled line. But while we're working them, I want you to continue thinking of the 4 S's. So we're going to keep working on straight, small, same-sized, and evenly spaced as we do our next practice piece. So grab another piece of felt, and we're going to draw a curved line and an angled line, and we'll work those together. And when we get to the angled line, I'm going to show you how to turn a corner here, make a nice sharp turn. So go ahead and grab your floss, your needle, and let's work that curved line. Okay, we're going to work our last stitch of our curved line, making our last stitch towards the back of our work, and we'll turn it over, tie a knot, and then we'll continue on with our angled line. Okay, so let's go ahead and work your way to the corner here, and what you're going to do to work that angle is, depending on where this little stitch ended, whether you're going down, my stitch ended going down, so my next stitch is going to come up in the corner. If your stitch ended up coming up, then you would go down into that corner. So one way or the other, you want a stitch that begins or ends right here at that point. And then all you'll do is you'll just continue on down the line. but that gives you a nice sharp corner. Okay, and then once you reach the end, go ahead and make your last stitch toward the back. Turn our work over and tie it off. This is the foundation for everything you'll learn from here on out. You're just taking your first few baby steps, but you will be running in no time. Keep practicing this stitch and be as consistent with your work as possible. You can draw different shapes or use different colors of felt or floss to keep it interesting. Maybe even try writing your name in cursive. Before long, you'll start to know what it's supposed to feel like as you make each stitch, and you'll move along without giving it another thought. Keep your sewing supplies in a box or a basket so that you have everything in one place. And when you're ready, you can move on to the next lesson and we'll add a couple more techniques to the ones you've just learned.